March 15th, 1943, 2:47 p.m., Camp Aliceville, Alabama. The metallic clang of a mess hall spoon dropping onto concrete echoed through the barracks as Obergefreiter Klaus Richter stared at the half-eaten can of peaches sitting abandoned on his bunk. Syrup still glistening in the afternoon light filtering through barred windows. Outside home, the Alabama sun beat down mercilessly on red dirt and chain-link fences. But inside the prisoner of war compound, German soldiers huddled in small groups, their faces bearing expressions that had nothing to do with defeat in battle and everything to do with something far more unsettling. A creeping realization that everything they had been told about their enemy's industrial capacity was not merely wrong, but catastrophically impossibly wrong. Possibly. The impossible claim had arrived that morning in the form of a single mimeographed sheet distributed by the camp commandant, Colonel James Patterson, a stern-faced man from Detroit whose grandfather had worked the Ford assembly lines. The document, translated into German by a nervous-looking corporal who kept adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles, contained a single paragraph that made seasoned Wehrmacht veterans laugh out loud with genuine amusement. According to American industrial reports, the United States was now producing one Liberty ship every 4.5 days, one aircraft every 5 minutes, and enough steel in a single month to build the entire German U-boat fleet 3 times over. These numbers, the prisoners agreed, were obviously propaganda designed to break their morale, the kind of absurd exaggeration that revealed American desperation rather than strength. 4,5 Tage für ein Schiff? Hauptmann Werner Dietrich had snorted, his iron cross catching the light as he gestured dismissively toward the crumpled paper. Do they think we are children? Even our shipyards in Hamburg, before the bombing, could not achieve such fantasy. The other prisoners had nodded in agreement, some actually chuckling at what they perceived as clumsy psychological warfare. The Americans, Dietrich had continued, they make good films in Hollywood, but they understand nothing about real production, real industry, real war. But the laughter died away over the following weeks as multiple independent sources began to converge on the same impossible conclusion. Letters from German prisoners in other camps across America told identical stories of overwhelming abundance. Red Cross reports, filtered through neutral Swiss channels, corroborated the production figures. Most disturbing of all were the eyewitness accounts from newly arrived prisoners, men captured from U-boats who had seen with their own eyes the convoys streaming across the Atlantic, endless lines of ships stretching beyond the horizon, more vessels than existed in the entire Kriegsmarine. Lieutenant Hans Kroger, pulled from the frigid waters off Newfoundland just 2 weeks earlier, had spent 3 days counting ships from the deck of his rescue vessel, 487 merchant vessels in a single convoy, protected by more destroyers and escort carriers than Germany had operational submarines in the entire Atlantic theater. Technical reports smuggled in through the International Committee of the Red Cross revealed the systematic architecture of American industrial mobilization with surgical precision. The Willow Run plant in Michigan, a single facility stretching over 3.5 million square feet, was producing one B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes around the clock, 7 days a week. The assembly line moved at precisely 2.8 feet per minute, carrying partially completed aircraft through 1,280 separate manufacturing stations where 42,000 workers performed their specialized tasks with mechanical precision. Raw materials entered the facility at one end: aluminum sheets, rubber components, engines manufactured in 14 different states, and emerged as 4-engine strategic bombers capable of carrying 5,000 pounds of high explosives across 2,850 miles of hostile territory. It was the mathematics of industrial warfare, calculated not in tactics or strategy but in the relentless accumulation of productive capacity measured in tons per hour, units per day, and the systematic transformation of an entire continental economy into a machine for manufacturing military supremacy. The central revelation came during the 3rd week of March, when a transport convoy arrived carrying 847 newly captured German soldiers to us, most of them veterans of the North African campaign who had witnessed firsthand the material abundance that had crushed Rommel's Afrika Korps. These men described American supply depots in Tunisia that stretched for miles, containing more gasoline than the entire German army had consumed in the previous 6 months. They spoke of American soldiers casually discarding equipment that German troops would have fought over: boots, rations, ammunition, medical supplies, all treated as infinitely replaceable. Feldwebel Otto Brenner, captured at Kasserine Pass, described watching American engineers build a complete airfield in 72 hours, using earth-moving equipment so massive that a single bulldozer could move more dirt in one day than a regiment of German soldiers with shovels could accomplish in a week. The systemic scale of American production began to reveal itself through an avalanche of numbers that arrived daily through official channels, prisoner correspondence, and the testimonies of men who had seen the impossible made routine. Each morning brought fresh intelligence that challenged every assumption the German prisoners had held about their enemies' industrial limitations. Liberty ships, 2,710 completed by March 1943, with production accelerating to 3.3 vessels per day across 18 shipyards from Maine to California. Aircraft production, 85,198 military planes manufactured in 1942 alone, more than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined, had produced in their entire war effort to date. Tank production, the United States had manufactured 24,997 Sherman tanks in the previous 12 months, while German factories had managed to produce only 5,966 Panzer IV tanks during the same period. Despite having a 4-year head start and the resources of conquered Europe at their disposal, steel production told the most devastating story of all, a tale of industrial capacity so overwhelming that it rendered traditional military calculations obsolete. American blast furnaces were producing 84.3 million tons of steel annually, while German steel production, even with captured French, Belgian, and Czech facilities, had peaked at 28.2 million tons. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. For every ton of steel that German industry could produce, American factories were generating 3 tons, and this ratio was widening every month as new facilities came online. The Bethlehem steel plant in Pennsylvania alone was producing more armor plate than the entire German steel industry, working 3 shifts around the clock with 180,000 employees whose productivity was enhanced by electrical power generation that exceeded the total electrical capacity of the German Reich. Obergefreiter Richter found himself studying these figures with the obsessive attention to detail that had once made him an excellent artillery spotter. The numbers formed patterns that revealed a truth more frightening than any military defeat. America was not simply fighting a war, but had transformed its entire civilization into an instrument of production that operated according to principles the German prisoners could barely comprehend. The Ford Motor Company had converted its civilian automobile production to manufacture aircraft engines, B-24 bombers, jeeps, and tank engines without missing a single day of operation. General Motors was producing aircraft engines, ammunition, tanks, trucks, and naval guns across 96 different factories, coordinating this production through a logistical network that moved raw materials and finished components across thousands of miles with railroad precision. The realization struck Klaus Richter with physical force on March 28th, as he stood in the camp mess hall watching American guards casually waste food that would have fed a German infantry company for a week. Sergeant Tommy Martinez from El Paso had opened a can of pineapple, eaten 2 slices, and thrown the rest into the garbage without a second thought. The gesture was not malicious or intended to taunt the prisoners. It was simply the unconscious behavior of a man from a nation that had solved the problem of scarcity so completely that abundance had become mundane. "In my hometown," Martinez had mentioned to another guard, unaware that Richter understood English. "My kid brother works part-time at the pineapple canning plant after school. They process 847 cans per hour, every hour, just in our little facility. Company says they're opening 2 more plants next month." The industrial mathematics of American mobilization extended far beyond simple production statistics into the realm of logistical coordination that defied European comprehension. The United States was simultaneously fighting a 2-ocean war while maintaining domestic production levels that exceeded peacetime capacity. Raw materials flowed from Minnesota iron mines to Pittsburgh steel mills to Detroit tank factories to Pacific shipping terminals with systematic efficiency that eliminated waste and maximized output. Railroad networks carried 1.7 billion ton-miles of freight monthly, more than the combined railroad capacity of Germany, France, and Britain combined. The Pennsylvania Railroad alone was moving more military cargo than the entire German transportation system could handle. And this was merely one of dozens of major American rail networks operating at maximum capacity 24 hours per day. Hauptmann Dietrich's worldview began to crumble during a conversation with Camp Commandant Patterson, who had mentioned almost casually that his hometown of Detroit was producing more military vehicles in a single month than German factories had manufactured in the entire year of 1942. "My neighbor works at the Chrysler plant," Patterson had said, lighting his pipe with the same casual motion he might use to swat a fly. "They're turning out one tank every 4 hours, 7 days a week. Plant employs 18,000 people working 3 shifts. Company built the whole facility in 8 months, from breaking ground to rolling the first tank off the line." The numbers were delivered without emphasis or dramatic effect, simply as statements of fact that required no embellishment to convey their devastating implications. The German prisoners began to understand that they were witnessing not merely superior production, but an entirely different relationship between industry and warfare. American factories were not struggling to meet military demands while civilian production suffered. They were expanding both military and civilian output simultaneously through technological innovations and systematic efficiency improvements that multiplied productive capacity without proportionally increasing resource consumption. The Willow Run plant produced bombers using assembly line techniques borrowed from automobile manufacturing, reducing construction time from 55,000 man-hours per aircraft to 18,000 man-hours while actually improving quality control and reducing material waste. The technical architecture of American mass production revealed itself through documents that circulated among the prisoners like contraband, each report more devastating than the last in its methodical destruction of German assumptions about industrial warfare. Henry Kaiser's shipyards had revolutionized maritime construction by applying assembly line principles to vessels that traditionally required months of skilled craftsmanship. The SS Robert E. Peary had been completed in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes, from keel laying to launch, a feat that German naval engineers declared physically impossible until photographs confirmed every stage of the construction process. Liberty ships rolled off the ways at Richmond, California, with mechanical precision, each vessel identical to the last. Standardized components manufactured in factories across the American continent and assembled by workers who had learned their trades in a matter of weeks rather than years. Klaus Richter received a letter from his brother Heinrich, captured at Stalingrad and now imprisoned at Camp Hearn in Texas, that described American agricultural abundance in terms that seemed like hallucinations born of malnutrition and despair. American prisoners of war were receiving daily rations that exceeded the food allocation of German civilians, while American soldiers in the field consumed fresh meat, white bread, canned fruit, chocolate, and coffee with such regularity that they complained about monotony rather than scarcity. Heinrich wrote that American guards routinely discarded partially consumed meals that contained more protein than German soldiers had seen in weeks of combat rations. "They feed their prisoners better than we fed our officers." Heinrich had scrawled in pencil on paper that bore the letterhead of the American Red Cross, itself a symbol of the systematic organization that characterized every aspect of American war production. The psychological impact of these revelations created fractures within the prisoner community that reflected deeper questions about the nature of modern warfare itself. Older prisoners, veterans of the First World War who remembered the starvation blockade and industrial collapse that had brought the Kaiser's Reich to its knees, began to recognize patterns that suggested history repeating itself on a vastly expanded scale. Oberfeldwebel Gustav Müller, who had fought at Verdun in 1916 and witnessed the gradual degradation of German equipment quality as the war progressed, observed that American military materiel showed exactly the opposite trend. Newer equipment was superior to earlier models. Production quality was improving rather than declining, and technological innovation was accelerating rather than stagnating under wartime pressure. The spring of 1943 brought a series of revelations that transformed abstract statistics into visceral understanding of American industrial supremacy. Newly arrived prisoners described the North African campaign in terms that contradicted every strategic assumption the German High Command had made about American military capability. The United States had transported, supplied, and maintained an entire army group across 3,000 miles of ocean while simultaneously supporting operations in the Pacific, Italy, and the strategic bombing campaign against Germany. American logistics had proven superior to German logistics even when the Wehrmacht operated from interior lines with mature infrastructure and established supply chains. The impossibility of this achievement, according to traditional military doctrine, was precisely what made it so devastating to German morale. Captain James Morrison, the camp intelligence officer, had fought with the 1st Armored Division in Tunisia and spoke fluent German from his pre-war studies at Heidelberg University. During routine interrogations that were more conversation than formal questioning, Morrison described American industrial mobilization with the casual authority of someone who had witnessed the transformation firsthand. In 1940, we had an army smaller than Belgium's. Morrison had told a group of German officers during one of their evening discussions. By 1943, we're fielding more divisions than you ever put in the field, and we're doing it on 2 fronts simultaneously while maintaining production levels that exceed our peacetime economy. It's not military genius, it's just industrial mathematics applied to warfare on a continental scale. The mathematical precision of American mobilization extended into areas that German prisoners had never considered strategically relevant. Aluminum production had increased from 327 million pounds annually in 1940 to 1.8 billion pounds in 1942, enabling aircraft production that would have been impossible under traditional resource constraints. Synthetic rubber production, virtually non-existent in 1941, had reached 185,000 tons annually by 1943, completely eliminating dependence on natural rubber imports from territories now controlled by Japan. The United States had solved resource scarcity through technological innovation and industrial capacity rather than territorial conquest, achieving strategic independence through production rather than expansion. The most disturbing aspect of American industrial supremacy was not its scale, but its apparent effortlessness. German war production required the mobilization of conquered territories, slave labor, and the complete subordination of civilian needs to military requirements. Yet American production increases had been achieved while civilian living standards remained stable or actually improved. American workers earned higher wages in 1943 than they had in 1940. Civilian automobile production had been converted to military use without unemployment or economic disruption, and consumer goods remained available despite massive military procurement. The contrast suggested that American productive capacity was so vast that total war mobilization represented only a fraction of potential output, rather than maximum effort under emergency conditions. The evidence arrived in waves throughout April 1943, each confirmation more devastating than the last, until the accumulated weight of testimony forced even the most skeptical German prisoners to confront an industrial reality that violated every assumption they had held about the balance of global power. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, a Chinese-American intelligence officer from San Francisco who spoke fluent German due to his grandfather's immigration from Bavaria, conducted informal interviews that revealed the scope of German misconceptions about American society. "You think we're soft because we have jazz music and Hollywood movies," Chen had observed during one particularly heated discussion with Hauptmann Dietrich. But those same factories that made radios and phonographs are now producing radar systems and aircraft engines. The same assembly lines that manufactured automobiles are building tanks and aircraft. We didn't abandon civilian production. We expanded it into military production. Technical specifications for American weapon systems, obtained through prisoner correspondence and Red Cross reports, revealed design philosophies that prioritized mass production over individual craftsmanship, reliability over complexity, and systematic standardization over customized excellence. The M4 Sherman tank, derided by German tank crews as inferior to the Panzer IV in direct combat, was being produced at rates that rendered qualitative comparisons irrelevant. American factories were completing 17 Sherman tanks for every German tank that rolled off production lines, and this ratio was increasing monthly as new facilities achieved full operational capacity. The Sherman's mechanical simplicity, which German engineers had dismissed as primitive, enabled field maintenance by crews with minimal technical training using standardized parts that were available at every supply depot from Algeria to Australia. The mathematics of American aircraft production challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between quality and quantity in modern warfare. The P-51 Mustang fighter, initially dismissed by Luftwaffe pilots as another crude American attempt at precision engineering, was being manufactured at rates that exceeded total German fighter production, while incorporating technological innovations that German engineers had considered theoretically possible but practically unachievable. North American aviation was producing 5 P-51s daily using manufacturing techniques that reduced assembly time from 13,000 man-hours per aircraft to 7,200 man-hours while actually improving performance specifications and reducing defect rates through systematic quality control procedures. Klaus Richter found himself studying these production figures with the obsessive fascination of a man watching his worldview disintegrate in real-time mathematical precision. The numbers formed patterns that revealed not just American industrial capacity, but American industrial philosophy, a systematic approach to manufacturing that treated war production as an engineering problem to be solved through efficiency improvements rather than heroic effort. Ford Motor Company had designed and constructed the Willow Run bomber plant in 18 months, creating a facility that covered more ground than the Pentagon and employed more workers than many German cities contained. The plant's assembly line moved B-24 Liberators through 1,080 manufacturing stations at exactly 2.8 feet per minute, 24 hours per day, producing strategic bombers with the same mechanical precision that had previously been applied to family automobiles. The strategic implications of this industrial capacity became clear through intelligence reports that filtered into the camp through official channels and prisoner correspondence. The United States was simultaneously supporting British war production through Lend-Lease aid, equipping Soviet forces with trucks and aircraft, maintaining its own multi-front military operations, and building strategic reserves for future campaigns. American Lend-Lease shipments to the Soviet Union included 400,000 trucks and jeeps, 12,000 armored vehicles, 11,400 aircraft, and 1.75 million tons of food, more military equipment than Germany had produced for its own forces during the same period. These shipments represented surplus production beyond American military requirements. Industrial capacity so vast that the United States could simultaneously fight its own war while supplying its allies with equipment manufactured to American specifications. Obergefreiter Walter Hoffmann, captured during the Tunisia campaign after serving with the Afrika Korps for 18 months, described American supply operations in terms that bordered on the surreal. They built a pipeline across Algeria in 6 weeks. Hoffmann told a gathering of prisoners in the camp recreation hall, his voice carrying the tone of a man recounting impossible dreams. Not a small pipeline for water or fuel, a major installation capable of supplying an entire army group. American engineers arrived with prefabricated sections, earth-moving equipment the size of buildings, and construction crews who worked around the clock using electric lighting systems that turned night into day. In 6 weeks, they created infrastructure that would have taken German engineering corps 6 months to complete. And they did it while simultaneously building airfields, ammunition depots, and repair facilities across 200 miles of desert terrain. The systematic coordination required for such achievements revealed organizational capabilities that transcended mere industrial production to encompass logistical planning on a scale that German military doctrine had never contemplated. American forces operated with supply lines that stretched across multiple continents, while maintaining equipment readiness rates that exceeded German domestic operations. Pacific theater operations required the construction and maintenance of naval bases, airfields, and supply depots across thousands of miles of ocean, coordinated through communication networks that enabled real-time management of resources and personnel. The invasion of North Africa had been planned and executed while American forces were simultaneously engaged in major operations against Japan, suggesting command and control capabilities that enabled true global warfare rather than regional campaigns with global implications. The central turning point came on May 12, 1943, when a convoy of trucks arrived at Camp Ellisville carrying equipment destined for disposal rather than distribution, creating a moment of revelation that crystallized months of accumulated evidence into visceral understanding. Klaus Richter watched through the chain-link fence as American soldiers unloaded perfectly functional radios, field telephones, medical supplies, and mechanical equipment, all items that German forces would have salvaged, repaired, and redistributed to units operating with chronic shortages. The disposal operation was conducted with bureaucratic efficiency rather than dramatic ceremony, a routine procedure governed by supply regulations that treated material abundance as a logistical problem rather than strategic advantage. Technical Sergeant Mike Kowalski from Pittsburgh, a second-generation Polish immigrant whose family had fled Europe in 1919 to escape the aftermath of the Great War, supervised the disposal operation with the casual professionalism of a man who had witnessed identical procedures dozens of times across multiple installations. "Newer models came in yesterday," Kowalski explained to Captain Morrison, unaware that his words were being overheard and translated by German prisoners who understood English. "Regulation says we dispose of surplus equipment rather than storing it. Creates maintenance problems and inventory confusion. Better to destroy old stock and maintain supply chain efficiency with standardized current models." The radios being discarded as obsolete were SCR 300 models that represented technological capabilities superior to the best communications equipment available to German infantry units. The systematic mathematics of American waste revealed productive capacity that operated beyond the threshold of scarcity economics into realms of abundance that German prisoners could barely comprehend. Food service operations at the camp discarded approximately 847 pounds of edible food daily, not through inefficiency or poor planning, but because American supply protocols delivered quantities that exceeded consumption requirements by design, building safety margins into logistical calculations that assumed occasional disruption or increased demand. The garbage from a single American military installation contained more protein, fat, and carbohydrates than entire German civilian communities received through official ration allocations. Yet this waste was considered normal operating procedure rather than criminal negligence. Hauptmann Dietrich's intellectual framework collapsed entirely during a conversation with Colonel Patterson about pre-war American industrial capacity. Revelations that placed current military production in contexts that transformed impressive statistics into terrifying projections of long-term strategic potential. In 1929, before the economic depression that you probably heard about in Europe, American automobile companies produced 5.6 million passenger vehicles in a single year. Patterson had mentioned while reviewing camp administrative reports, we reduced that production to almost nothing during the economic crisis, then rebuilt it to 4.8 million vehicles annually by 1940. Converting automobile production to military vehicles wasn't a technological challenge. It was just a matter of changing the specifications and retooling the assembly lines. Same factories, same workers, same organizational methods, different product. Was the industrial philosophy underlying American war production represented a fundamental departure from European assumptions about the relationship between civilian and military economies? German war production required the conversion of civilian industry to military purposes, creating shortages and economic disruption that weakened domestic support while limiting productive capacity to existing facilities and established supply chains. American mobilization had achieved the opposite effect, expanding both civilian and military production simultaneously through technological innovation, organizational efficiency, and systematic capacity increases that multiplied output without proportionally increasing resource consumption or labor requirements. Statistical evidence accumulated throughout May 1943 revealed the scope of American productive expansion with mathematical precision that eliminated doubt while destroying hope. Steel production, 89, 7 million tons annually, compared to Germany's maximum output of 31.8 million tons, including captured facilities across occupied Europe. Aluminum production, 2.1 billion pounds annually, enabling aircraft production rates that exceeded the combined output of Germany, Italy, and Japan. Electrical power generation, 241 billion kilowatt-hours annually, providing industrial energy capacity that exceeded the total electrical production of the European continent. Petroleum refining, 1.7 billion barrels annually, creating fuel supplies that enabled global military operations while maintaining civilian transportation, heating, and industrial requirements without rationing or shortage. The avalanche of numbers continued relentlessly through official reports and prisoner testimony, each statistic confirming American industrial supremacy across every category of strategic production. Railroad freight capacity, 738 billion ton-miles annually, moving raw materials and finished goods across continental distances with systematic efficiency that enabled just-in-time delivery to manufacturing facilities and military installations. Synthetic rubber production, 72,000 tons annually by 1943, completely eliminating dependence on natural rubber imports while actually improving tire quality and durability through chemical innovations developed specifically for mass production applications. Machine tool production. American factories were producing more precision manufacturing equipment in 6 months than German industry had accumulated over the previous decade, enabling expansion of productive capacity that accelerated rather than declined under wartime pressure. Agricultural production revealed the same pattern of systematic abundance that characterized American industrial operations. Food supplies that exceeded domestic consumption requirements by margins that enabled massive exports to allied nations while maintaining civilian nutrition levels that surpassed peacetime standards. American farmers produced 3.2 billion bushels of corn, 1.1 billion bushels of wheat, and 197 million tons of other agricultural products during 1942, quantities that fed not only American military forces and civilian population, but also provided substantial Lend-Lease food shipments to Britain, the Soviet Union, and other allied nations. This agricultural abundance was achieved through mechanized farming techniques that freed rural labor for industrial and military service while actually increasing per-acre productivity through scientific agriculture and systematic efficiency improvements. The moment of absolute comprehension arrived on June 3, 1943, when Lieutenant Hans Kroger received a letter from his younger brother, Friedrich, a naval engineer captured after the sinking of U-571, now imprisoned at Camp Papago Park in Arizona. Friedrich's letter contained technical drawings smuggled past censors, detailed schematics of American shipyard operations that revealed construction techniques so advanced they seemed like science fiction rather than industrial reality. The Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard in Baltimore was simultaneously building 14 Liberty ships using prefabricated sections manufactured in factories across 17 different states. Coordinated through logistical networks that delivered precisely machined components to assembly points with railroad precision. Each ship required 2,770 tons of steel plates, 675 tons of structural steel, 240 tons of cast iron, and 75 tons of brass and bronze fittings, materials that arrived on predetermined schedules that eliminated waste while maximizing assembly efficiency. The technical revolution underlying American shipbuilding represented systematic innovation that transcended traditional craftsmanship to achieve industrial art on a scale that German engineers had considered theoretically impossible. Welding techniques developed specifically for mass production had replaced riveting as the primary assembly method, reducing construction time by 35% while actually improving structural integrity through metallurgical advances that German steel specialists were still attempting to understand. Kaiser Industries employed 196,000 workers across 4 major shipyards, producing more tonnage monthly than the entire German shipbuilding industry could achieve using traditional construction methods, established techniques, and skilled craftsmen who had learned their trades through decades of apprenticeship and experience. Captain Morrison conducted an informal seminar on American industrial mobilization during one of the evening discussion sessions that had become regular features of camp life. Educational programs that served both intelligence gathering and psychological warfare functions while providing intellectual stimulation for officers accustomed to strategic analysis and systematic thinking. Morrison's presentation included photographs, production statistics, and technical specifications that documented American industrial expansion with scientific precision, evidence that eliminated speculation while confirming the most optimistic estimates of American productive capacity that German intelligence had dismissed as Allied propaganda, designed to discourage continued resistance. The Ford Motor Company converted the Rouge River plant to military production in 4 months, Morrison explained, spreading photographs across the recreation hall table while German officers leaned forward to examine images that showed assembly lines stretching beyond the camera's focal range. Same plant that produced 1.2 million civilian automobiles annually was redesigned to manufacture aircraft engines, military trucks, jeeps, and tank components without interrupting production schedules or reducing employment levels. Workers who had been installing carburetors in family sedans learned to assemble aircraft engines using identical manual skills applied to different mechanical systems. Industrial efficiency actually improved during conversion because military contracts enabled systematic modernization of equipment and production techniques. The systematic coordination required for such industrial transformation revealed organizational capabilities that operated according to principles German military doctrine had never incorporated into strategic planning or logistical calculation. American corporations were coordinating production across multiple states through communication networks that enabled real-time management of resources, personnel, and transportation schedules on a continental scale. General Electric was simultaneously manufacturing aircraft engines in Massachusetts, radio equipment in New York, naval guns in Pennsylvania, and electrical systems in Ohio, coordinating these operations through systematic management techniques that eliminated duplication while maximizing efficiency across geographically dispersed manufacturing facilities. Klaus Richter found himself calculating the implications of American industrial capacity with the methodical precision that had made him an effective artillery observer. Mathematical analysis that revealed strategic possibilities beyond conventional military doctrine or traditional concepts of national power. If American factories could produce 96,000 military aircraft annually while simultaneously maintaining civilian automobile production, expanding steel output, and increasing agricultural productivity, then current military operations represented only a fraction of potential American military capability. The United States was fighting a global war using surplus industrial capacity rather than maximum effort, strategic reserves that could be expanded indefinitely through additional facility construction and workforce training programs. The mathematical progression of American productive expansion suggested victory through industrial attrition rather than tactical brilliance or strategic innovation. Systematic accumulation of material superiority that rendered traditional military considerations irrelevant through overwhelming quantitative advantage. German forces were fighting with equipment shortages, fuel rationing, ammunition limitations, and supply chain disruptions that reflected fundamental resource constraints. While American forces operated with material abundance that enabled tactical flexibility, strategic mobility, and operational persistence that German commanders could not match using traditional military methods or established organizational techniques. Obergefreiter Richter received confirmation of these calculations through a letter from his cousin Ernst. Captured during the Sicily invasion and now imprisoned at Camp Shelby in Mississippi, Ernst described American amphibious operations in terms that revealed logistical capabilities beyond anything German military planning had ever contemplated. Coordination of land, sea, and air forces across multiple theaters simultaneously while maintaining supply lines that stretched across thousands of miles of hostile territory. They landed 180,000 men with complete equipment in 72 hours. Ernst wrote in pencil that had been provided by American guards, along with writing paper that bore watermarks indicating manufacture in Minnesota. Not just infantry, but tanks, artillery, trucks, ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies, communications equipment, and engineering materials. Everything needed for sustained operations against prepared defensive positions held by experienced troops using established fortifications and interior supply lines. The systemic revelation reached its crescendo during July 1943 when American guards began casual conversations about post-war planning that revealed industrial capacity so vast it transcended military applications to encompass complete economic reconstruction of allied nations, devastated by years of total warfare. Corporal Danny Sullivan from Boston mentioned that his father's construction company had received preliminary contracts for post-war reconstruction projects in Europe. Infrastructure development programs that assumed American industrial capacity would simultaneously support continued military operations against Japan while rebuilding roads, bridges, factories, and civilian facilities across the European continent. The casual nature of these discussions, conducted without security concerns or classified restrictions, suggested that American planners considered victory so inevitable that post-war reconstruction had become a more pressing concern than current military operations. Technical Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, a Spanish-speaking intelligence specialist from Los Angeles whose grandparents had immigrated from Mexico during the Revolution, supervised prisoner work details with the professional efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex logistical operations under time pressure and resource constraints. During routine supervision of camp maintenance activities, Gonzalez mentioned that American aircraft production was being deliberately limited by government policy rather than industrial capacity, production schedules that prevented overaccumulation of military equipment that would be surplus to requirements after Japanese surrender. Boeing submitted plans for a new bomber plant that could produce 500 B-29s monthly. Gonzalez had told Sergeant Kowalski during a discussion about factory conversion planning, War Production Board rejected the proposal because existing capacity already exceeds projected requirements for Pacific operations. We're producing bombers faster than we can train crews to fly them. The mathematics of American military personnel training revealed organizational systems that operated on scales German military doctrine had never contemplated. Systematic programs that produced qualified pilots, mechanics, radio operators, and technical specialists with assembly line efficiency that matched industrial production techniques. American pilot training programs graduated 65,000 qualified aviators annually using standardized curricula, specialized facilities, and systematic progression from basic flight instruction through advanced combat training. These programs operated simultaneously across 43 training bases in 17 states, coordinated through administrative networks that tracked individual progress while managing aggregate resource allocation and scheduling requirements for maximum efficiency and minimum waste. Naval construction statistics demonstrated American shipbuilding capacity that exceeded the combined maritime resources of all other belligerent nations, while simultaneously supporting merchant marine expansion that enabled global supply operations without depleting military transport capabilities. Essex-class aircraft carriers were being completed at 90-day intervals, using modular construction techniques that applied mass production principles to naval architecture. Standardized components manufactured in specialized facilities and assembled at shipyards that had been designed specifically for rapid completion of identical vessels. Each carrier required 55,000 tons of steel, 2,100 tons of armor plate, 1,200 miles of electrical cable, and 847 different types of precision machinery, materials and equipment that arrived on predetermined schedules that enabled systematic assembly without delays or resource bottlenecks. The avalanche of production statistics continued through August 1943 with relentless mathematical precision that eliminated doubt while destroying any remaining German illusions about achieving strategic parity through technological innovation or tactical superiority. Aircraft production, 99 to 950 military planes completed in 1943, including 13,500 heavy bombers capable of strategic operations against targets deep within German-controlled territory. Tank production, 29,497 armored vehicles manufactured during the first 8 months of 1943, exceeding total German tank production since the beginning of the war while incorporating design improvements that enhance firepower, mobility, and mechanical reliability. Artillery production, 257,390 pieces of field artillery, anti-aircraft guns, and naval weapons completed in 1943, more than the combined artillery production of Germany, Italy, and Japan during their entire war mobilization efforts. Ammunition production revealed the same pattern of systematic abundance that characterized every aspect of American war manufacturing, quantities that enabled sustained operations without rationing or conservation, while maintaining training programs that consumed more ammunition than German forces allocated for actual combat operations. Small arms ammunition, 15.6 billion rounds produced in 1943, approximately 200 rounds for every American soldier, while simultaneously supplying Allied forces through Lend-Lease programs. Artillery shells, 196 million rounds of various calibers manufactured during the first 9 months of 1943, enabling sustained bombardment campaigns that consumed more explosives in single operations than German forces had expended during entire theater campaigns. The systematic accumulation of such quantities required industrial coordination that transcended traditional manufacturing to encompass scientific management of resources, personnel, and production schedules on a scale that German industrial planners had never attempted. Klaus Richter spent hours staring through the camp fence at the Alabama countryside, rural landscape that showed no visible signs of war production yet supported industrial operations that dwarfed anything achieved in Germany's most advanced manufacturing regions. The contrast between appearance and reality revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had shaped German strategic planning since 1939. The assumption that American industrial capacity was concentrated in easily identifiable urban centers that could be disrupted through conventional military operations. American war production was distributed across thousands of facilities in hundreds of cities, decentralized manufacturing networks that could absorb massive damage while continuing operations through redundant capacity and systematic backup procedures that eliminated single points of failure. The final revelation arrived on September 15, 1943, when Colonel Patterson distributed a declassified War Production Board report that documented American industrial output with bureaucratic precision that rendered propaganda unnecessary through simple mathematical demonstration of productive supremacy achieved through systematic efficiency rather than heroic effort. The document, printed on paper, manufactured in Oregon, using wood pulp from forests that stretched across 3 states, contained statistical summaries that transformed abstract numbers into concrete understanding of industrial capacity, so vast it operated beyond traditional concepts of national resource limitation or strategic constraint through material scarcity. American industrial production during 1943 had achieved levels that exceeded the combined manufacturing capacity of Germany, Italy, Japan, and all occupied territories while simultaneously maintaining civilian production that supported domestic living standards higher than pre-war levels. Total manufacturing output, $183.6 billion annually, compared to Germany's maximum industrial production of $74.3 billion, including captured facilities and forced labor programs across conquered Europe, steel ingot production, 89.7 million tons annually, enabling simultaneous construction of Liberty ships, aircraft carriers, tanks, artillery, and civilian infrastructure without rationing or material shortages that limited production schedules or design specifications. Machine tool production. $1.2 billion worth of precision manufacturing equipment produced annually, creating industrial capacity that expanded exponentially rather than depleting under wartime pressure. The systematic mathematics of American abundance reached beyond military production into areas that German prisoners had never considered strategically relevant. Civilian manufacturing that continued uninterrupted while supporting military requirements that exceeded anything achieved through European industrial mobilization. Consumer goods production, despite conversion of automobile factories to military use. American manufacturers produced $47.8 billion worth of civilian products in 1943, including household appliances, clothing, furniture, and luxury items that remained available without rationing or government allocation programs. This civilian production operated alongside military manufacturing rather than competing with it, industrial capacity so vast that total war mobilization represented expansion rather than conversion of existing facilities. Hauptmann Dietrich found himself confronting the ultimate implications of American industrial supremacy during his final conversation with Colonel Patterson, a discussion that revealed post-war planning assumptions that confirmed German strategic defeat through economic inevitability rather than military conquest. My hometown of Detroit is already planning factory conversion for peacetime automobile production. Patterson mentioned while reviewing prisoner repatriation procedures that assumed German surrender within 18 months. General Motors estimates they can resume civilian vehicle manufacturing within 6 months of war's end while maintaining sufficient military production to support Pacific operations and occupation duties in Europe. Same factories, same workers, same organizational systems, just different product specifications and supply chain coordination. The industrial philosophy underlying such planning revealed American strategic thinking that operated beyond traditional military doctrine to encompass systematic reconstruction of global economic relationships based on productive capacity rather than territorial control or resource extraction. American war production had created manufacturing capability that could simultaneously support military operations, domestic prosperity, and international reconstruction programs without depleting industrial capacity or reducing technological innovation. The United States had solved the fundamental problem of modern warfare, the conversion of civilian economy to military production, through expansion rather than sacrifice, abundance rather than rationing, systematic efficiency rather than heroic improvisation. Klaus Richter understood finally that German strategic planning had been based on fundamental misunderstanding of American society, assumptions about industrial limitation that reflected European experience rather than American reality. The United States possessed continental resources, transcontinental transportation networks, systematic manufacturing coordination, and technological innovation capabilities that enabled industrial expansion beyond anything achieved through European methods or organizational techniques. American victory was inevitable not through military genius or tactical superiority, but through systematic application of industrial mathematics to strategic problems that German doctrine had never contemplated. The metallic clang of the mess hall spoon echoed once more through the Alabama afternoon as Klaus Richter picked up the abandoned can of peaches, syrup still glistening in light that filtered through barbed wire and chain-link barriers that could not contain the implications of what he had witnessed. Outside, American guards discussed weekend plans with casual confidence that reflected absolute certainty about war's outcome, conversations that revealed a nation so confident of victory that military operations had become routine rather than desperate, systematic rather than improvised, inevitable rather than uncertain. It was not tactics or strategy that would determine this war's outcome, but the industrial inevitability of American productive supremacy applied to global conflict through mathematical precision rather than military art. The spoon struck concrete with finality that marked not just the end of a meal, but the end of illusions about industrial warfare in the age of American abundance. And Klaus Richter knew with crystalline certainty that Germany had been fighting not just a war, but the accumulated productive capacity of an entire continent, organized for systematic victory through overwhelming material advantage that rendered courage, skill, and determination irrelevant against the mechanical mathematics of industrial supremacy.